give us a cheer if you're a fan of The Expanse. So give us a cheer if you're a fan of science in The Expanse. Okay, so we've got a brilliant panel on. So I would like to welcome onto the stage the one and only Steve Straight, who is an actor and producer of The Expanse, and you might know as Captain James Holden. And if you'd like to know what it feels like about floating around in space, then our next guest is your man, which is Neil Melville, who is a parabolic flight trainer. And hands up if you remember that first ever image of a black hole. Yes. So Sera Markoff is our third and final panelist on the show, and she was behind the Event Horizon telescope. Okay, I think we're going to fly through this. There's so many questions. So I guess, Steve, first question for you is, how did you prepare for your role of Captain James Holden in terms of like understanding the scientific concepts in The Expanse?
Sure.
You know, we're talking about artificial gravity, space travel.
Sure, yeah. I mean, you know, we had the incredible privilege of having a showrunner who was a physicist. And the authors made a point of making sure that the science was all correct. So we had a few different advisors that we spoke to, a gentleman from NASA, and then working with the dance choreographer to make the zero gravity look correct, because the wires are they're very helpful in showing it, but it's very difficult to make it feel effortless. So a lot of physical training to make that a reality, to keep the magic there.
And when you get those first scripts through, is it like, was it really clear that you're like, okay, they're taking the science really seriously of this, like we're doing this properly?
Yeah, and you know, because I came in as a fan, you know, I had read the books before I even knew they were being adapted. It meant a lot to me that they were going to really try to do that. You know, at the time, I mean, it was in the very beginnings of streaming, and it was a very ambitious thing to be able to put on screen and to shoot at the pace that you do on television. So I loved the ambition of that, and we had this incredible team, and if anybody was going to be able to pull it off, it was going to be them. So I was just along for the ride.
Yeah, okay. And Neil and Sera, obviously you're scientists, but you're also mega fans of the show. So,
Absolutely.
like,
Very
much. Yeah. So, like, watching it, were you surprised by that?
Yeah, I mean, just blown away by how accurate it all seems, how kind of plausible it all is, right down to the ship designs. I mean, so much sci-fi, you know, they have ships flying like this with people standing, walking on them. The Expanse is the other way around, right? Because you're using the acceleration of the engines to keep everyone against the floor. Yeah. So all the sets are small with ladders in a stack, just as it would actually be. And that kind of attention to detail is quite captivating for engineers and scientists that you know, understand how it would really work. Sure. You see something that gets it, and it's really engaging.
And how about you, Sera? Were there any standout moments that you're like, oh my gosh? Like,
well, I mean, just in general, as you're saying, like as a scientist, we're so annoying, right? When we watch these things and we take everything apart. And I will not name other shows, but some haven't done it as well. And it was so satisfying. I mean, I study, you know, black holes and space-time. So for me, it was really intriguing about the gate technology, and maybe we can talk at some point about the slow zone. But, you know, it's just, you can watch it and you can believe it. Of course, we don't understand the theories behind these things yet, but it was presented, I think, in such an amazing way that a scientist who even studies this stuff could, like, leave their brain in instead of at the door.
I love it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And so, for you, Steve, like, how did your appreciation for science change over the course of the show?
Oh my goodness! I mean, you know, it was something I've always been interested in and curious by, but in digging into it the way that you do, you know, as an actor, it was just a remarkable experience. Just moving through this with Naren Shankar, our showrunner, you know, as a guiding hand, to be able to truly understand just how arduous and how hard all of this is. And, you know, for us as storytellers, having space be a hostile environment and to be able to show it accurately allows us that dramatic fulcrum, you know, towards the middle of season 3, where the physics do change a bit, and it does allow that next gear in the storytelling. So making it feel accurate and seem accurate was paramount to making the show work.
What were some of those moments that were like, okay, this is actually really hard?
Sure, yeah. I mean, frankly, the original stuff that we really had to kind of wrap our heads around was the zero gravity stuff and the wire work. And oftentimes when you see it in a film done accurately, they have a lot of time to be able to shoot that. And we're shooting very quickly on a television show. So having a system in place to be able to do that was key, but just in terms of the understanding of just how hard it is to be in space, and the incredible engineering that's needed. And so many of the characters in the show, whether it's Naomi Nagata or Amos, I mean, they're these incredible engineering minds. And Holden really relies on them for most of the technical answers. But yeah, an incredible appreciation of just how hard it is. I mean, incredible stuff, incredible people.
I mean, so full disclosure, you and Neil have worked together before.
Yes,
so,
we did. Yes, we did. Yeah.
So Space Rocks, for anyone that hasn't seen on YouTube, there is a series which is you experiencing parabolic spaceflight. So what was that experience like? And then we'll go on to sort of how that happens and your role, Neil.
Yeah, it's very, very hard to describe it in words, the feeling of zero gravity. For so many years we'd been emulating it and thinking about it and trying to show it as it actually is, and it's there built into your subconscious after a certain amount of time. When we got there, it was this very strange thing to be able to feel the techniques we were doing that were so hard while we were shooting it actually work in this very elegant way. And I was like, oh my God, it really works. It really works.
This was obvious seeing you do it. I mean, I've had the privilege of introducing probably hundreds of people to zero G, and most of them have the decency to freak out a bit. You were just so, you responded to the unusual sensation, but then so quickly in the first parabola, you did a couple of completely subconscious movements to orient yourself at the camera and started talking. Like, what? Wow. It took the rest of us a long time to get that. So maybe we need to take some of this, method acting stuff and start training our astronauts with it. I've honestly never seen anyone take to it quite like Steven did. It was really remarkable.
Thank you, man. Thank you.
I mean, how often are you in zero G, Neil?
Sorry?
How often are you in zero G?
I'm very lucky. I get to fly on all of the ESA scientific flights, which normally we're there for science, we're there for technology, we're there for training astronauts. And we do about 9 flights of that per year, but each one has 31 parabolas. So yeah, I get to spend quite a long time, maybe an hour and a half a year in zero G or something. The best you can get without being an astronaut, I reckon. Yeah. Very lucky.
Yeah. And can you talk us through very briefly, because what is microgravity? How are you creating that or experiencing that?
Well, basically, all you need to be weightless is really to be free to fall. So the trick is, when we kind of throw the plane up in the air with the engines as hard as we can, and then they cut back on the throttle to let go. So they've kind of thrown us, and we fall on this parabolic arc, just as if we're in space, just as if we're in an orbit. But we would normally be slowed down by the air drag, but they use just a little bit of engines to counteract that, and they're trying to fly the plane around us without touching us, really. They're pretending we're in space, we're free falling around this orbit, and trying not to touch us with the plane, and we can only do it for 22 seconds, because that's how fast you end up near the maximum speed of the aircraft. Then you've got to pull out, which is why we do it multiple times. But as long as you are free to fall, and everything around you is falling at the same time, then you're not pulled up, you're not pulled down, you're not pulled side to side. That's what being weightless is. And it's exactly the same weightlessness as in orbit, but their parabola is much bigger, so it keeps missing the Earth. That's the only difference. They're going so fast sideways, they keep missing the Earth. We only have a plane, we can't do that, so we just do 20 seconds at a time.
Yeah. Sarah, would you want to experience that?
I mean, definitely. So if they ever need to send like a small physicist into space, I really, unfortunately, I was too small to make the astronaut cut. My eyes were too bad. But hopefully they'll film seasons in space, and we can all like go up and just do this as non-pros. We can ask
love that.
Bezos. But I think one of the things you mentioned actually in your filming for Space Rocks with Steven was the fact that relativity came out of exactly that. Einstein was thinking about the fact that you can transform gravity away in certain frames, and that was sort of the beginning of his thinking about it. So for me, it's great to see, that it's handled by the physics as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would love to experience it very much. So yeah, volunteer.
Yeah. And what would you say were some of the more challenging concepts, or are there any concepts or moments that really surprised you to see on the series that you're like, oh yes, Sarah's first?
Talk about the slow zone.
Yeah, go on.
So, just for those who haven't seen the show, maybe you want to give a little story about it. But I would.
Spoilers.
Yeah, spoiler.
Spoiler
Come on, it's
alert.
been out for a while. You should watch it. But maybe I would love to hear a bit about how you, as the producer, and also the team, thought about making this concept come in, and also the ideas that you discussed, because this would be very difficult to do if you were an alien.
Yeah. I mean, for the slow zone and for the ring gates, I mean, one, as we were saying before, is to make sure that the science was accurate up until that point was key, because if you don't do that, then there is no dramatic payoff when it does change. But I remember I talked to a high school in Brooklyn a couple years ago about, we were using the show to talk to STEM students. And we were saying, a whole episode on paper, if you show it to an executive, it's like, oh, this is about deceleration. They're like, excuse me? What is this? You're going to shoot an episode about deceleration? It's like, well, actually, when things stop on a dime in the slow zone, when things freeze, it's a disaster. Yeah. It's a disaster that happens. I mean, the slingshotter kid, all this kind of stuff. So, the actual science of it provides dramatic opportunity. And that was something we really leaned into the entire time. But having the slow zone and having a bit of magic come where we can't quite explain everything, that's where having someone like Narain is so important about the whole thing, is to keep us honest the entire way through. And visualizing all of that was an incredible creative payoff for us as artists, and thinking about it and thinking about what that looks like, what that feels like, what that means for us dramatically as storytellers. So, for all of that, it was, and even for like Holden connecting the circuit, and visualizing what 1 billion years of a civilization could mean. Yeah. What does that look like? What does that feel like? All of the playing around with stuff like that is what makes it such a fun job.
I was thinking a lot, especially in preparation for this, if you could control the rings,
sure.
And of course, effectively, you have to harness the power of black hole. Most people agree this would have to be some kind of wormhole technology,
sure.
Which, spoiler alert, we don't actually know exists, but something that we're quite interested in. But, the idea of slowing something down like a low bandpass filter, where you're sort of putting a velocity that you can't go faster than, but light can still go faster. Right. There's a real trick in that, we can slow light down using materials now. We know how to do that. And if you're near a black hole, you slow time down, and
sure.
so you can slow light down as well. The rules change.
Yeah.
But somehow there's this, way of loopholing it that I think is really well captured in the show.
Oh, thank you.
And it's great.
Thank you.
And did you consult any scientists or other people, academics, for the development of the role of Holden?
For Holden himself, actually someone I did talk to, just in terms of the psychology of being on a ship in a small space for a long period of time. I spoke to someone who served on a submarine for 6-7 months. Because at the time, prior to getting onto the show, we didn't have access to, astronauts to speak to or whatever. So I thought it was the closest kind of comp that I could imagine, because mostly as actors, we're working with psychology. That's really kind of what we're working with at any given time. So I wanted to understand what the psychological framework of someone who is comfortable in those places with a hostile environment around them, what that would be, and what it would take to want to be down there and command a ship, like that. So yeah, I mean, prep, research, all of that stuff is incredibly important to being able to trick yourself into believing that you can do that and that you're there. Because if I can trick myself, I can hopefully trick you that you also feel the same.
And when you see characters now in, experiencing zero G and stuff like that, what's your reaction to that? Do you think about your experiences at work, or is there anything else that it takes?
You mean when I see it on the screen?
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost impossible for me to, like, as Sera said, scientists watching TV and movies, we're always picking this stuff apart and asking all the difficult questions. So whenever I see any zero G on screen, I can't help but is it
Where are the
wires? Is it CGI? How are they doing that? And actually, the Expanse is one of the few that it was genuinely really hard to tell.
Thank you.
The giveaway often is like puffy face syndrome, because of the fluid shift that you have.
Yeah.
But that requires people to be a bit more less lithe than Steven, perhaps. You don't have a puffy face in zero G. Now I've seen this, so it doesn't tell. The other giveaway is the posture.
Right.
Okay.
People pretending to be in zero G tend to have their arms like here.
Yes.
And it's actually like here,
Much
isn't
higher,
it?
much higher.
As you found out.
Yeah.
So that was going to be one of the things I was wondering. Like now, having had the experience,
Yeah.
if you went back to do the Expanse or more of the Expanse, what would you take from it? What would you do differently?
Yeah, the height of the arms is a key one. I mean, we did try to do that. We did cheat it a little bit where, some of the astronauts we did talk to, season 2, once the show got going, we had access to a few more people. You oftentimes see astronauts up in space with their arms crossed.
Because this looks stupid.
Because it looks a little funny, right? So, like, if you'll notice, Holden is often with his arms crossed.
Was that intentional?
That was intentional.
Oh, very good.
That was intentional. I called it early, so no one else is doing it. Or, people are generally holding on to something. So that was all thought about.
And no one with long hair, really, or it was always tied back.
Oh, except for the first episode.
Yes.
With Julie Mao. So because the visual effects for that is very, very expensive, right? So if everybody's got floating hair, it jumps the VFX budget, through the roof. So everyone's got their hair tied back. Or
That's one of the things that sold it, though, because those first episodes with Julie Mao established it looking so fantastic.
Yes.
And then the wire work was almost indistinguishable. You're like, wait, hang on, but they can't have done Julie Mao with wires.
Right, and she ties her hair back in shot.
Yeah.
With her hair, in zero gravity. So, little camera tricks and storytelling tricks to kind of sell it and establish ourselves in real science before we move into the show.
And I'm interested to know, have you two got any questions for Steven as well? Yeah, I mean, it's Sarah's itch. You go for it.
We kind of got started, but, I think you're clearly such a method actor, right? I mean, this is your training. So as scientists, I think it's so interesting for us to see how did this change or evolve your views on science, on the universe, your curiosity, how you interact with science, and maybe even if you do talk to the other fellow actors, how has this evolved your paths in this way? And you're doing science advocacy. Say some things about this.
Science advocacy and STEM outreach is so important, not just for where we're going, but for really urgent issues we're dealing with today, with climate or what have you. But for us, understanding how we are moving these stories forward in an accurate way is so key to telling the story itself and to being able to sell it in ways that hopefully do inspire, that hopefully do reach folks. I mean, I could never have imagined that it would reach literally into space. I mean, when I got a call last December that Andreas wanted to speak to me, it was like, I'm sorry, excuse me, like what?
Yeah.
I'm pinching myself. I'm like, really? You never know where those things might hit, and in thinking about just every season I went in, I just had a much deeper and deeper respect for just how difficult and hard and creative science is, and so by the end of the show, I'm by no means a scientist, but I certainly have a deep love and appreciation for it, and and it's part of the reason why I like to do STEM outreach and that. So I really got that inspiration from doing the show itself.
I mean, many of us, I have to say for myself, like, I became a scientist really through science fiction. You know, I didn't come from a family that did that sort of thing, so science fiction, listen up, is the gateway drug to science. So please get your kids reading science fiction and watching The Expanse. They're going to
Same
go,
here, absolutely. Yeah. Science fiction as a kid got me into it.
And life imitates art, right? And
Yes,
so I think
yes,
you,
yes, it does. And you know, and so much about The Expanse is about humanity, and it's about, you know, are we bringing all of us out there with us? You know, all the good, maybe some of the bad. How do we course correct? You know, and how do we thoughtfully go into space? How do we thoughtfully move forward? How do we thoughtfully evolve? You know, and it really is a kind of meditation on that.
Yeah. And I think the fans are very important to The Expanse.
We owe the whole show to them, like quite literally. I mean, people do say that, but we really do owe the show to them, and they saved us. They saved us, and we always adored and loved our fans. But you know, once we only got a lifeline because of them, and you know, it was really dedicated the last 3 seasons in whole to them, and you know, we felt a measure of gratitude that was so deep and so meaningful. And you know, as an artist, it's the greatest feeling in the entire world to know that your work has touched folks out there, and that they're fighting for you. They're fighting for your show. They're fighting for the work to continue. And yeah, it was incredibly moving. It was the most moving experience I've ever had as a creative person. And so thank you for that there in the front. I see you. Yeah.
And do you find that most of your fans are people who work in STEM or have a passion for that?
Many do. Yeah, many do. I had this wonderful experience just a couple of weeks ago. This lady who I think she's in her 80s. She was a teacher of math at a local college. Had come up to me and told me how much she loved the show, and she's like, "The math is correct." I was like, "Thanks." I was like, "Thank you. I didn't do any of it, but thank you." Thank you. Yeah, a lot of people are. A lot of people are interested in the STEM sciences for the show and for the fan base.
And are there any things within The Expanse that you wish that you had here at ESA, you know, and any technologies?
Ringgate.
An Epstein drive.
I mean, so much of the technology in The Expanse is you know, far advanced, but we're starting to work towards it. It's a privilege to be working on the parabolic flights where some of these technologies come into play, especially because we don't just do 0G, we can also do Moon G, Mars G. Unfortunately, we didn't manage to do them with you that time.
Sure.
So we really are starting to test technologies that are going to enable lunar colonization, they're going to enable Mars exploration and eventual colonization. So I would love to end up with some of that technology, you know, to enable the first kind of self-sustaining colonies on the Moon and on Mars. This would be the best thing from The Expanse to come. Maybe not quite in our lifetimes, but as soon as possible. Yeah, I'd love to see it.
Yeah.
And I really hope that we've got time for just a few questions. Yeah. So does anyone have a question for the team? Hand straight up.
There's one in the back.
Right at the back. Sorry, Tim.
It's a question for Steven. The Expanse is so many people's favorite sci-fi show ever.
Thank you.
Mine too.
Thank you.
But I'm curious, what are your other favorite sci-fi shows and movies?
Sure. I was a huge sci-fi, still am, fan. Early Ridley Scott has my heart, you know, whether it's Alien or Blade Runner. Yeah, early Ridley Scott. I mean, and very influential on the aesthetic of The Expanse as well. You know, very much that kind of blue-collar, working-class view of space exploration. And the folks, you know, the engineers working within the ship's depths is where we stay. So yeah, I'm a huge science fiction fan. And you know, even for thinking about Holden, Ripley was really the biggest kind of character comp that I was thinking about, and Sigourney Weaver's portrayal of that is, to me, is still the greatest protagonist in science fiction.
Any other questions? Oh, we'll go right here at the front, this gentleman with the glasses.
Hey, again, a question for Steven. Regarding the potential other 3 seasons of The Expanse? I'm sure you get this a lot, but I would be remiss if to not asking. And if it ends up being happening, how would you guys handle the time jump?
That's a very good question. It's a very difficult question. It would depend, honestly. And if we are so fortunate to have the chance to do the next 3, I have no doubt that Narain, Ty and Daniel collectively is James S.A. Corey, who wrote the books. We've always relied and trusted on their guidance in terms of the adaptations. They're beloved books for a reason, so we want to honor that in the best way that we can. So if we ever did get the chance to do another 3, we would rely on them again to be able to honor those books and do them the right way that at least captures the spirit of what they are. So.
Yeah. Where can we fly a plane to get that done?
We need one more plane.
We've got time for one more, yes, let's go this guy over here.
Seeing the backdrop of Jules Pierre Miao in The Expanse, what's your opinions on private versus public exploration of space? And that's actually to all 3 of you.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question, and so much of The Expanse is a meditation on how are we bringing all of us to space, including all of our flaws, and it's something I think we need to be really thoughtful about in terms of how we regulate what's going on there. We make sure it's a human endeavor. I think one of the most inspirational things that I've learned in speaking with astronauts over the years is just the perspective that it gives them, being up there looking down on our beautiful jewel of a place. There's no countries and borders and things, and I think there's this perspective, that kind of pale blue dotness, if you will, of that seems to really resonate with folks who have been up there. And I think it's very important that we be thoughtful with the steps forward, so we don't repeat the same mistakes we have all through our history. So much. I was asked a lot during The Expanse, because in many ways it's a story, it's a political allegory as much as anything else. If we were talking about modern day, and the answer is no, is that the authors are writing about history. It just happens that we repeat and repeat and repeat. And the story of The Expanse is breaking the cycle. That is the victory of The Expanse. So in that, I think it's very important that we stay very mindful and thoughtful as we keep stepping out into the solar system and hopefully beyond.
You had something?
I mean, sure, I think about this a lot. I'm more of a fundamental scientist, but we work a lot with corporations, and of course, I'm hoping that I will be flown into space, as I've said many times, at some point. But, I think private corporations have an important place and to drive the technology.
Sure.
But, like you were saying, we don't want to do this in an irresponsible way. And I think we maybe are at risk of doing that at the moment, because it's kind of a free-for-all at the moment, and we need to have regulations. We need to think about, space is not something that should be owned, by any country. It's something like maritime law.
Right.
That we need to have an agreement about how this benefits, humanity, doesn't ruin other environments as well. And I think a lot about another science fiction author, probably many of you have read, like Kim Stanley Robinson, wrote The Ministry of the Future. Mm-hmm. What he talked about was the fact that our profit system can be made profitable, but thinking about profiting on the future surviving. Keeping it going in a way that benefits people. And I think if we can go into space with that attitude, private and public together, I think it can work quite well.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, everyone. And that's it for the end. But please make a round of applause.
All right.
Lovely.
Thank you so much, y'all.